I was wrong about this lens. I wasn't even going to review it, but out of curiosity, here it is, and I'm so glad that I gave it a try. I want to tell you what I like about the Sirui 135mm anamorphic lens, tell you what I don't like, show you some sample footage, and tell you why it surprised me so much that it's actually become one of my favourite lenses now, and I recommend to anybody that this belongs in your camera bag. Now 135mm is a very tight focal length, it's very much zoomed in, so that means that whatever you're filming, you need to stand quite far back to get any backgrounding whatsoever. But I kind of like a little bit more of a wider shot, like a 35mm or a 50mm. So the idea of a 135mm lens wasn't particularly appealing to me. However, because this is an anamorphic lens, the glass elements inside are actually capturing a wider field of view and squeezing it onto the sensor, meaning that by the time you've de-squeezed the clip, it's actually a lot wider than a standard 135mm lens would be. Look at the difference between this shot filmed on the 70-200 lens at 135mm versus the Sirui 135mm anamorphic. Massive difference. Now before I went out and filmed, I thought I was just going to end up with a load of tight shots of Brad's face with no variation. But actually, this lens is extremely versatile, way more than I thought it was going to be, and I couldn't stop filming with it. So we're out and about filming with the Sirui lens. Poor Brad's trying to have a conversation with me, and all I keep doing is stopping and taking video of stuff. But that shows you how good the lens is when you can't put it down and you want to keep filming with it. And it's been a while since I've been that excited about using the lens, and that is the feeling that you want, because it's inspired me and motivated me to go out and film more. It's even got a filter thread on the end of the lens, so you can use your filters and not have to worry about a matte box like you would normally do using a typical anamorphic lens. The image itself is nice and soft, it's still sharp and in focus, but it's just got that cinema softness about it, which is awesome. The colours are fantastic, nice and natural, skin tones look phenomenal, so it's super simple to colour grade, which I like. I like keeping things nice and simple. The bokeh is extremely good looking. I was never bothered about that sort of stuff until now. When you use a lens like this and you notice that oval bokeh, it just looks so much nicer. I could never put my finger on what would make something look cinematic or whatever you want to call it, movie-like. But when you see what image this produces and the bokeh in the background, that is it. That's what does it. Well, partly that. Now obviously, it being a cinema lens, it doesn't have image stabilization or autofocus, but paired with the Lumix S5 Mark II, this has got awesome stabilization, the best in the game, hands down, no doubt about it. But it's also got an anamorphic mode for stabilization. It truly makes these two the perfect pairing. I was just going handheld, I didn't even have a cage, and it was a cold day, so I was like wobbling around with the cold. No problem with stabilization. It makes the footage look like quality handheld footage that's been stabilized by a shoulder rig or something. Now that's partly down to the weight. I mean, it's a big lens. If I compare it to the 50mm Sirui anamorphic lens, there's quite a big difference, but having that extra bulk really helps stabilise your shots. T2.9, it's not the fastest lens, doesn't let crazy amounts of light in. However, when it comes to video, I never find myself shooting wide open at f1.8 for example, never do it. So T2.9 for me is a nice sweet spot. Being that way, it just makes things a lot easier to focus, especially because it's manual focus lens, still lets a plenty amount of light in, but again, paired with the Lumix S5 Mark II, we've got dual native ISO on there of 640 and 4000. So if I'm out in the dark, 4000 is the perfect sweet spot, paired with 2.9, and it just looks fantastic. Then we've got the blue flares, kind of the POS of anamorphic lenses. That's why people go crazy over these lenses. But for me, that's kind of the downside. I love that look, don't get me wrong, and when you first see that blue streak, you go wild over it and it looks amazing, and that's what everybody wants. Great for certain things, but not so good in other situations. Apparently they have tamed it down a little bit. In lighter situations, I did notice that it wasn't as strong as they used to be. It does look good. However, if you're trying to film lights, you can get too much of that streak in and it does look distracting. So I would love to see an anamorphic lens with a much more subtle flare or a little bit less saturation in it, or no flare at all if that's possible. I don't know if it's possible. If I want the flare, I'll go for this lens. If I don't want the flare, I'm kind of stuck between how good the image looks and the colours and everything, but then I'm gonna get some flare. Now because this is a 1.8 times squeeze, when you're using 16:9 aspect ratio, that image becomes very long and thin, which doesn't look great. I mean, it's a nice wide field of view, but it just looks a bit odd. What we need to do to counter that is either put the camera in 4:3 mode, or what I like to do, this is the way I prefer it, film in 16:9, then go to 180% on the x-axis, bring the overall size down to 100% or to where the ends meet the end of your frame. That gives you your base point. But obviously, as you'll see, that's too thin. So to bring it back round to a more traditional anamorphic aspect ratio, we then go up to 129%, and that looks a lot better. So it's all well and good having a fancy lens that looks amazing, but you've got to know how to colour grade it, because a lot of people, including myself back in the day, make their footage look worse than when they started. And I know colour grading can seem complicated, but it doesn't have to be. And that's why you should watch this video here, because I show you how easy it can be in 3 easy steps.